Okay, so thank you very much for coming this morning, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. Just a tiny bit more about me. I started People Clever about 2.5, probably getting on for 3 years when I registered it, but I've been trading in earnest since January of 2018. I focus on providing, high quality, professional, qualified advice to small businesses, mainly micro entities, under 30 people, to my clients generally. Really enjoy working with charities because that's quite a bit of my background in HR, and just really having a positive impact in small businesses. So whether you're thinking of hiring, what Sam said, there's quite a few people starting up who haven't even hired that first person, but it's what you need to get in place before you even get there. So yeah, anyway, that's a bit about me. And why I'm talking to you about GDPR today is pre-HR career, I had quite a long IT contracting career in the city as well. So in any of my subsequent jobs, I would end up in charge of data protection, mainly because I didn't break eye contact fast enough in the senior team meeting. So yeah, so there you go. And of course, there's a great many, it's integral, links between GDPR and HR, because of course in every organization, the HR department are managing the bulk of personal data. So that's where we are. So I'd like to know where you are. So I'd just like a show of hands to see who here has a privacy policy. Okay, so not everybody. Of those people who have one, who wrote it? Okay, so for the people who didn't write it, who actually understands the privacy policy?
Did not sign it.
Yeah, okay, fine. Okay, because what I'm finding in the last year, I'm helping bringing my clients into compliance, well, they're all compliant now, is that a lot of people went through a bit of an exercise last spring. Hired somebody in, got some policies written, great, stuck them in a drawer. Has anybody read them? Are they understand? What is actually going on? So what I thought would be interesting, you notice I dropped the HR for the title of this presentation, because when I was looking at it yesterday, I thought actually, probably what we could do with is just a bit of a review, see where we are, have some discussions, talk a bit about, a few examples. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to yabber at you for about 30 minutes. Please do interrupt if there's anything that does not make sense. Just talk about it in general terms, where we should be, what we should have, and then we'll just do a few quick exercises just to make sure people have been paying attention and not thinking about their Okada order. And then we'll have a summary, and then break for coffee, and then we'll have questions afterwards. That's the normal format, isn't it?
That is the perfect.
Okay, February. Okay, so.
Could I just ask you to just stand on the mark there? We're recording,
Sorry.
and otherwise you'll be weirdly off of one side.
You just get one ear.
No,
Sorry,
fine.
Alright, this is where I get to find out all my weird habits on camera. So just where are we now? Just a bit of information. So as of the 3rd of July, complaints to the ICO had increased by 160%. So in real terms, that was 6,281 complaints. The thing is, people read, there's information on the internet, people are becoming more aware of their rights, and so it is very important to have this sorted. Over a quarter of complaints were about large organizations. There were some big ones in the press, processing large volumes of sensitive data, which is now special categories. And what I've found, as I said, is many small organizations are still working towards compliance. And employees are often overlooked as a group of data subjects. There's a large emphasis on looking externally, looking at clients, entering information on websites. A lot of people think GDPR is just about websites. It isn't, it's about all your data practices, sorry. Right, so I thought it would just be useful to just review some common terms. Some of you will be completely familiar with this, but just to be clear, a data subject is a living individual who's a subject of personal data. So that's basically everybody. If you're alive, you're a data subject, okay? And personal data is any information about a data subject. So you can see that is fairly far-ranging, all right? And data processing basically means doing anything with personal data. So whether you're gathering it, you're sending it to somebody, you're using it for a particular process, you're even deleting it, that's all data processing, archiving, okay? Special categories of data, we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail as we go in, but previously referred to as sensitive data, obviously the original Data Protection Act, or the first Data Protection Act came in 1998. Well, that's the same year we had Google introduced. So if you think about how many things have changed technology-wise since then. So it now includes things such as genetic data, biometric data, and special categories, previously known as sensitive, is where there is a significant risk to an individual's rights and freedoms. So we'll talk about that in more detail as we go through. And I've put just there that it's not including criminal data, which is handled separately under Article 10. Okay, so I'm just going to go off screen and have a slurp of water because I'm going to do a lot of talking. So, as we all know, as we all hopefully know, the GDPR, which is now enshrined in the Data Protection Act, came in on the 25th of May 2018, which is why we all got absolutely spammed with emails begging us to continue subscribing, which happily that seems to have subsided. And of course a lot of them ignored us anyway. So the previous cap, and I'm sure you all know this, but it's important to stress, the previous cap on fines of £500,000, sorry, I've just realised that should be a euro symbol there, for serious data breaches under the old DPA is replaced with €20 million, or 4% of global turnover, whichever is the greater. Now, the ICO were clear that they weren't going to be excessively punitive, I think was the wording in the blog, about applying fines. The point is they can. And I think a lot of small businesses, particularly tiny micro entities, saw the words global turnover and thought, yeah, that's not me. But it is. It's everybody. It's absolutely everybody. You know, if you have a business, it's you. And subject access requests are now free unless excessive. You used to have to pay a tenner, and it was 40 days. Now its response must be without undue delay and within a month. So
if you're quoting to somebody what it's going to cost them, it's £17 million, roughly, or £20 million per one.
So sorry, if you're fined, this is for data breach, it's to a map, it's whichever is the greater, but the ICO has they have the, I'm trying to think of it, the discretion to decide what that fine is. They're not going to fine, you know, they're not going to fine you €20 million. Well, it's very unlikely because you wouldn't have it and they wouldn't get their money anyway. So, you know, but you have to consider that even £5,000 to a micro entity. And it's not just the financial risk, of course, it's the risk to reputation. If people know their data isn't safe, are they going to come to you? Probably not. Okay? Yeah, so some key principles for you. So this is, as I said, this is very much an overview. I just thought it would be useful to kind of have an overview here and see where we're, you know, see where we are. Key principles, accountability. So organizations need to be able to demonstrate they're compliant. As I said, it's not a box-ticking exercise. Yeah, it's all very well having a policy, privacy notices, etc. If you stick them in a drawer and you don't train your staff, if you don't communicate them, if you don't enshrine them in all of your processes, it's no good, obviously. Enhanced rights for data subjects. It's all about giving data subjects more control over their data and how it's used, because quite clearly, data is big business. I mean, you just have to look at Cambridge Analytica and some of these other, you know, scandals. It's a huge commodity now, in a way that I think it wasn't perceived as that, possibly even 20 years ago, by the majority of people. So transparency. Privacy notices and policies written in clear and concise language, and notices must be accessible. So there's a tendency in some circles, I remember working in a city, this is a very common thing, to write everything in a whole host of legalese. Well, that's all very well and fine, but you have to consider your audience, because it's not accessible if people don't understand what you're on about. So, for example, children, I think it's on some online services, they can give consent, I think, from age 13. Now, if you're writing a privacy policy for somebody who's 13, you'd use a lot of visual references, you know, icons, little padlock, that sort of thing. Why not do that for everybody? You know, keep it simple, keep plain English. I'm all for plain English. You know, you can alienate people through language, and so it's important that the people who are reading those documents understand what you're getting at.
just to sort of back that up, there's research been done that people, when they're reading stuff online, because of usually the speed of interaction, their reading age is about 12. So you shouldn't use big fancy words and complicated sentences.
Yeah.
Keep the reading age to about 12 and you are pretty much...
Well, I think that's it. And don't assume a level of knowledge. You know, you don't want people having to go and look up words. Just, I mean, they'll give up. They won't do it, will they? They won't read it. And then, really, is your policy? No, it's your.
It's not for you.
Because I had definitely turned mine off. You know, then you've lost them. They haven't read the information, so I wouldn't consider that accessible. You know, you haven't really told people what you're doing because you haven't made it easy for them to understand. So just, you know, thinking about targeting your audience. And privacy by design and default. And so considering security first in all data processing. I mean, we'll go through a bit more with the thought processes towards the end, but really, every piece of personal data that you come in contact with as a business person, you should be thinking, I mean, ideally you have this documented in your policy, but just as a matter of practice, in the same way as health and safety, where we all share health and safety responsibilities, we should all be thinking about how we're working safely, how we're making the environment for other people by our actions. Same thing for data protection. You know, you're thinking about, okay, this is a valuable thing, this is somebody's data, how am I keeping this safe? You know, why do I need it in the first place, which we'll go through, but you know, how am I keeping this safe? And look to always have privacy by design and default, the safest possible way of looking after that data. Clearly, you need to be able to utilize it, and you don't want to make it so unwieldy that you can't access things, you know, but it should always be security first, really. Because as we can see on the previous pages, data breaches cost in terms of reputation and in terms of money. Okay? So who does it apply to? Everybody. Sole traders, micro-entities, business of every size from one person plus. Now the ICO have a really useful tool on their website, basically to find out about your compliance duties, which I would recommend you have a look at. I've got a handout with a checklist that's come from their website actually, which is really good because it includes sole traders. But there is a tool that preempts that you can go through just to see exactly what your responsibilities are. But if you're handling any level of personal data, you will have a responsibility under the GDPR. So think of it as default position. It applies to all of us. And, you know, always better to be, you know, I'm a great person for contingency and having things in place, and, you know, you don't want to be that person, you know, who gets caught out.
I've bumped into a virtual assistant this week.
Yeah.
She said, oh no, I'm not registered.
Ah.
But you have all of your directors'
Absolutely.
data on your PC, yeah, but it's not mine.
Well, there'll be some that's commercially sensitive, and hopefully that would be covered by confidentiality clauses with the supplier agreement. But also, you know, that there's going to be a huge amount of personal data, and even just things jotting down about, you know, directors' habits and things, you know, because that's the thing. If you're a virtual assistant,
She books the holidays, she gives children a passport.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Tell her it definitely applies to her.
Does she need to actually be, you know, registered?
Registered, yeah, she probably does. So get her to have a look at the tool. Just Google, I think, what's it under? But it's self-assessment, that's it. Yeah, on the ICO, if you actually go, they were a bit belated on the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office website, with getting information up, and there were a lot of people in need of the resources in the run-up to 25th of May last year. But actually now they have some very helpful checklists and tools for small businesses. Okay, yeah, and I've said if your business dealing with personal data, you must be compliant. You may need to be registered with the Information Commissioner's Office. You need to check. Okay, so just talking about lawful bases. So under the GDPR, you have to be able to think of this as connect the dots. You have to be able to process all personal data under one of these bases. So we've got consent, contract, legal obligation, vital interest, public task, legitimate interest. And what's more, you have to tell data subjects at the point of collecting their data. Now, previously, under the old Data Protection Act, a lot of companies relied on consent, and a lot of companies relied on that sort of double negative consent, you know, where you get the tick box on the website, that if you do, don't, you know, and you think, wait a minute, what am I signing up to? Okay, They can't do that anymore. It has to be transparent. It has to be an opt-in. It has to be much clearer, going back to the principles of transparency, really. So consent, if that's the basis you're using to process personal data, it's likely to need a review. And an excellent example is employee contracts, because the employee contracts, as they stood pre-2018 or pre-May 2018, unless you were really ahead of the game, would be likely to have a clause within it talking about data protection, which said, you know, basically by signing this contract, you agree to us processing your personal data. Well, that's no longer sufficient. You have to tie it to the correct basis. So contract, there will be some data that you process on the basis of fulfilling a contract. There's certain things you're going to have in order to fill a contract with somebody. I mean, bank details, that's quite a good example. You have to pay them. That's part of fulfilling a contract. So it'll be quite clear. Some of them are quite clear. Legal obligation. If you're legally required to store, let's say, health and safety information. Okay, so you would have something like that. There will be a legal requirement. HMRC, another really good example. You need to keep records for 6 years plus current. So you would be required to keep that under legal obligation. So at the point where you, and we'll talk about this in a bit more detail, but at the point where you're collecting this information, you need to tell data subjects what basis you're linking it to. So, and it's important to get it right. Don't say it's consent, and then they say, well, I withdraw my consent, because that's another key thing under consent. I've got a whole slide on consent, so I'll go into more detail. I withdraw my consent, you say, well, too bad, I'm keeping it anyway, because I need it for the HMRC. Well, you were never processing it on consent, you were processing it on your legal obligation. So it's really important to get that clear from the beginning. Vital interest, this is a very narrow basis, and this really is life or death. I do some work for a social care charity, and we were talking about if there was not something on file with a medical consent form, and one of the residents perhaps was unconscious for whatever reason and had a fall, and you had crucial information that wasn't included on that medical consent form, and you were communicating it to the emergency services. So this is a very narrow band, and you're actively encouraged by the ICO to find another basis. It's very limited cases that would apply. Public task will be unlikely to apply here. Think about things like things within public service, an MP, perhaps information that they may have, unlikely to apply in this room. Legitimate interests, now this was the big catch-all where people weren't using consent, they were using this for marketing. With legitimate interests, this is all data that you're processing that doesn't fall into one of the other 5 in the legitimate interests of your business, but what you must do is carry out a legitimate interest assessment. And I'm saying these things, don't think this is a 50-page document. Half a page of A4, which shows that you have weighed your legitimate interest as an organization, as a business, against the legitimate interests of the data subject. So you have to be able to justify it, and you can be challenged on it. Yes?
Just asking, I think in legitimate interest, I've had a lot of previous discussions with people about if you're a membership organisation, for example, and emailing and updating information. And I've had some people that I'm part of, a member of, some organisations have said, no, we can't do it as a, we can't send out information without your permission, even if it's an event or something.
There's some exemptions for membership organisations, and again, it's worth checking with the ICO. But generally speaking, if you're processing it on the basis of legitimate interest, and when I was talking about the deluge of emails we all had before May 25th last year, what some organizations have done, if you notice you're still getting emails from some of them and you think, hang on a minute, I'm pretty sure I didn't give them my consent. That is because they're processing it on legitimate interests. But what you have a right to do in that case is the right to object. You can say, actually no, I don't want you to process it, take me off your system. If it's being processed on the basis of legitimate interests, they should remove you. The one thing that they might do, some companies keep like a, what would you call it, like a no contact list. They might keep skeletal data like your email address, just to say, never ever contact this email address, but it shouldn't have any associated data, connecting you in any way to anything else. Yeah.
a bit hard if the email address is your name.
Well, and this is the difficulty. I mean, I personally wouldn't have a no contact list because I would be more proactive. I would have, these are the people who have said that I can contact them, or these are the people I know are okay with it because they haven't objected. You know, I just wouldn't have them anywhere because I would be worried about somebody accidentally forwarding something after they'd already objected. So, but the key thing here is to just really think carefully. This is a data mapping exercise. Now, some of you will have hired somebody to do this for you ahead of getting your policy in place. Some of you will have done this yourself. But because, you know, nothing is static, you know, we're moving all the time, aren't we? Our environment is changing, technology is changing, the information we're gathering may be changing. You just need to be keeping on top of this. And as you're thinking about bringing things in for, if you've got a new process, you know, think about, oh, okay, so what data am I bringing in? What lawful basis am I processing this under? Yeah?
I do have a question.
Sure, yeah, no, I
Going
thought you
back
did.
to,
That's
like,
why I'm looking
I was
at
just
you,
waiting
sorry.
till the end.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So in my kind of industry, we have access to people's data, and I'm just trying to work out, because obviously I use Google's advertising platform, Microsoft's Facebook, so I know that they've kind of covered themselves. I'm just trying to work out, because in some cases some clients give me full access so that I can download invoices for them and send that across, because they, for whatever reason, they don't want to log in or they find it too complex, and so I then have access to billing information if I wanted to.
If you wanted to. Within your supplier agreement, there should be reference to their data protection policy, and you're required to adhere to that as part of the supplier agreement. So they will have covered themselves. What they will have put in their privacy notice, which is when you're telling everybody what you're doing with your data, in effect. I like to keep them separate. A lot of organizations have them as one, and we'll talk about that as well. But they will have said, we are transferring your data to third parties, possibly on the basis of legitimate interests, possibly on the basis of something else to fulfill a contract, but it should be detailed within their privacy notice, so you'll be covered by that. But if you start doing something else, which is not covered by that agreement, then I would strongly suggest you need to provide them with your own privacy information and make sure that you're covered under one of these. But it sounds to me like you're completely covered because you're working basically for that organization and they have already provided the privacy information, provided that you're sticking to the services within your supplier contract. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just want to make sure, because I know that in some circumstances I've got access, should I wish to, like that personal kind of data. I just want to make sure that everything is protected. Is absolutely fine. I know
absolutely.
that Google and the big guys kind of safeguard it quite a lot, but I just want to make sure that...
Well, and you need to make sure, because what you don't want to be is the weakest link in the chain. So if you're downloading things on your laptop, I mean, you know, ideally you work remotely and you're not bringing data onto your laptop, you know, you're just accessing it remotely, then it's all protected on a, you know, secure server, password protected, because you would have to log in and not download it. But if you're starting to download things, you need to, ideally don't, but if you must, for whatever reason, you need to make sure you've got sufficient security on your laptop itself, that you're encrypting things, because you know you can put just a simple layer of encryption on a document, you know, with password, that you don't stick your password on the outside of your laptop like some people used to do when I worked in the city. A nice little post-it on the underneath of their laptop with their password. So you need to consider your own security arrangements as well, I would say, because of course that's your reputation as a supplier. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so, and as I said, you must tell data subjects at the point of collecting their data what you're doing with it, how long you're keeping it, who and where you might transfer it to, share it with, via privacy notice. Now, who here transfers data outside the EU? Yeah. Now, what I would say is, who here uses a cloud-based system? Okay. If you're using a cloud-based system, you are transferring data out of the EU. Now, it's covered if you're looking at Microsoft OneDrive, for example, or Google Drive. It's covered under the EU-US Privacy Shield, but you are actually transferring data if you're using a cloud service. So there's a lot of things that need consideration and thought.
It will depend where the server is.
It will
based.
depend, yeah, it will depend, but
Not
you
necessarily
have
true,
to
because
assume.
the backups will all go to the States.
That's what I was
Absolutely
going to say,
every single
because
backup
some,
goes to the States.
yeah.
It's in Redmond.
Is there
It's
any
fine.
Yeah.
understanding?
that was my understanding with Microsoft when I looked into this
And that's where
originally.
the EU
Yeah.
US agreement
The
comes in.
Privacy Shield comes into arrangement.
Yeah, I remember attending sessions before the deadline last year, and it was still a moot point whether we were going to leave or not. So given it's a EU-US shield,
Yeah,
what's the situation if we crash out no teams?
well, my goodness.
Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows? Nothing is certain. Pigs are flying. You know, I mean, seriously, ugh. You know, yeah, I hear what you're saying. There will need to be something which takes its place quite
Bottom line,
clearly.
nothing will change because the
Yeah, well,
EU
and
law is
exactly.
enshrined in the UK.
Yeah, and actually, it's a good point because it's enshrined in the UK. But also, if you're dealing with the EU, you know, we're going to have to work to at least that level of standard. You know, that's going to be the situation across a lot of things, not just data protection. I mean, well, anyway, I won't get into that because we could talk about that all morning. But yes, thank you. Right, so enhanced rights for data subjects under the GDPR. Right to be informed. Now, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about privacy notices. And again, I'll talk about privacy notices and privacy policies on the next page. I like to think of them separately because privacy notices are where you are actually informing people. The purpose of that document is to inform people. Now, there's different groups of people whose data you're processing. I tend to keep things separate from my clients. Employees are one group, clients are one group, mainly because the majority of people don't want to have to read through a whole load of information that doesn't relate to them. I find it, you know, you can have one overarching intro, but you can have either very clear, distinct sections or have separate documents. So the data subjects have the right to be informed, and as I said on the previous page, that is at the point you collect their data. So you can do this in lots of different ways. You'll notice that on some websites you get like a little pop-up which says we collect this data because of bloody bloody blah. You know, it's like two lines. What that should do is then link to the full privacy notice. So at the point you're collecting information, you should be telling people why you're collecting it, you know, what it's for, and ideally the lawful basis. Right of access. This is subject access requests I was just talking about. So you have the right to access your data by putting in a subject access request. Now, I put at the bottom, not all rights are absolute and depend on lawful basis. So the example I would probably give you is if, you know, if an ex-employee wanted to see something, you know, if they wanted to see their full employee folder, well, you may have a disciplinary in there and it may include witness statements which name somebody else. So you might want to redact it slightly. There may be other things that aren't, you know, just because it's in the employee file doesn't necessarily mean that that should be given it in its entirety. You have to consider other people's rights as well, obviously. Yeah, so right to rectification. So this is all about accuracy of data. This was under the previous Data Protection Act. This was one of the 8 principles, I think, which was basically that data should be accurate. It's just, besides anything else, it's really annoying. One company I worked for actually used to send my payslips pretty much to the wrong address for about 18 months, no matter how many times I told them. It's just, it's not good practice. It doesn't look good. It's sloppy, you know. But besides anything else, data subjects have the right to have their data be accurate. And so they have the right to rectification. So in the same way subject access requests, they would write to whoever is looking after the data in your organization. Probably it's you if you're a one-person organization. And they would say, this is incorrect, can you fix it? And you need to do it. You need to act on that without undue delay and within 30 days. Right to erasure, there was quite a bit of press around this. This is this idea of being just deleted altogether. Now again, not all rights are absolute and depend on lawful basis. So if you have a legal obligation, obviously, you can't delete that. You might also have, under legitimate interests, if you look at some insurance policies, they require some organizations to keep records for 40 years. Now that could be redacted. That's largely to do with things like asbestos claims. So, but there may be a requirement to keep some limited amount of data, and again, you would go through a legitimate interest assessment to say, this is why we're keeping it balanced with the rights of the data subject, okay?
And my nursery had to keep their children's data.
20, is it 20? Oh, is it
7-0.
7-0? I've not heard 7-0 before, I've heard 21.
They might have a child guardian's claims.
Sounds like they're erring on the side of caution there, but yeah, actually, I mean, and that's something else, you know, and this is why it's important to look at things like the terms of your insurance. You know, find out what your insurance is requiring you to keep, you know, because then that, you know, that's another thing to consider.
So let's clarify, is that the nursery's policy that they've said 70 years, or
Yeah.
is that a legal basis that says 70
No,
years?
that's the nursery.
I don't know
In which
about
case, I think the nursery is doing itself a disservice,
Yeah, it's too long.
because it's far too long, and the nursery should be looking at what is the minimum it needs to
Yeah.
under legal requirements.
Which I understood is 20 to 21
Yeah, I
years.
still- I
Yeah, yeah,
agree.
yeah.
But some insurances are 60+ years,
Yeah,
and
well,
they
and it
might be
depends.
keeping it for the record.
I've only known it for 40 years, but it's a good point because with child abuse claims, I hadn't actually considered that, so I'll look into that. Thank you. Yeah.
Until
Okay.
6 years.
It's always something that,
Market,
pardon me.
that's it, market.
We keep them until 6 years. SRA rules
Oh, okay. Okay.
prescribe to the
Yeah, see, that's
Issues.
HR is what we do. We do 6 years because that's the
Yeah.
CIPD recommendation.
Yeah.
But obviously if there's a legal obligation or it's in your legitimate interest because of the terms of your insurance or some such
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, so it's just thinking through carefully as, you know, when you're doing this, when you're mapping your data as, you know, as your processes change.
You can never be really deleted, can you? Because of payroll.
No, you can't really, but you can stop annoying people from spamming you with email. You know, there's lots of things you can do, you know, and you can have lots of different aspects of your data removed. You know, it is within your rights, provided there isn't another reason, you know, a lawful basis such as legal obligation why they're keeping it. Or the organisation decides, like in the case with insurance, that their legitimate interests outweigh your own to keep some redacted data. But you know, you have to just be very careful about it, and it's about giving things consideration, careful consideration. Right to restrict processing. This is tied to right to rectification. You know, if somebody is irritatingly, I don't know, I mean, sending payslips to the wrong address is hardly a crisis, but if there's something that's going on because your data is inaccurate, you have the right to restrict processing. The right is to request that they restrict processing until it's rectified. So again, you would write to the person in charge of data in that organisation, or email, ideally. The right to data portability. This is actually more Robin's area, so this is sort of talking about being able to take things that are in a particular automated format in an open source format to another organisation. So again, this is unlikely to apply here, and that's a whole conversation in itself. But just so you're aware that it is there. And right to object, and this, as I said before, this ties back to processing things on legitimate interests, that somebody would have a right to object, and this is largely going to be about marketing communications. There are the privacy and electronic communication regulations as well, which also restrict businesses on how they can contact you know, people on a B2B or business to individual basis as well. So it's always worth asking yourself, as well as GDPR, what else applies here? Because it's very likely there is something else that applies. It's not just GDPR. And rights-free automated decision-making, including profiling. This is things like credit reference agencies. If you disagree with something, you know, you have rights around that. And just to stress again, not all rights are absolute, and it depends on the lawful basis. Okay? So just talking about what I was saying earlier about this is my personal preference, is to keep these separate. A lot of smaller organizations will have a privacy policy which serves both of these purposes, and possibly also serves the purpose of appropriate policy document for special categories, which I'll talk about. But I think all of us have a privacy policy either available to our clients or on our website, or, you know, however I tend to email mine because I don't collect information on my website. But the point about the privacy notice is that it is about telling people what you're doing with their data. The policy part itself tends to be more detailed about your security arrangements and what I would consider organizational guidelines for employees when handling personal data. It's more about the detail. What you do need to tell people in their privacy notice, you do need to tell them that, you know, how long you're keeping it, so retention schedules. You know, if you're transferring it, as I've said, you know, you may think you're not transferring it outside the EU, but you probably are. You know, what covers it in that case. Yeah, you know, just as much information as you can give around that, and consider the audience, as I said, use visual aids and icons, and break it down to what I've called layered notices and just in time. And that's what I was talking about, like the little one-liners. If you do have web forms, and I understand Robin does quite a bit of this as well, that you know you can have 1 or 2 lines which just says why you're collecting that data as you go through the form, because you should be telling them as you're taking in that data what it's for, what lawful basis. Okay. Yeah. So as I said, with the privacy policy, you just need more detail. I tend to think of that as an internal document. This isn't. I'm thinking of this as separately to an appropriate policy document, but you may have it combined. If you have it combined, and I'll talk about this on the next page, then you have to be aware that the ICO can request it at any time. And this is another reason why I like to keep them separate. For an organization my size, i.e. me, until September when I'm hiring somebody, I have a privacy notice and I have a privacy policy. And my privacy policy includes all the information I should have in an appropriate policy document. The appropriate policy document is a requirement from the ICO, which is specifically about processing the special categories of data. So because that data needs additional protection. So just talking about this. So this is special categories of data. So anything that falls under one of these is considered a special category, and it's considered to pose, if it came into the public domain, a significant threat to an individual's rights and freedoms. So anything that falls under these categories. So when I talked about the appropriate policy document, which I have combined with my privacy policy, it's just talking about specifically how you are handling these types of personal data, these specific types of personal data. And also you need what's called an Article 9 condition, and I know this is an overview, so this is quite a bit to take in. Anybody can email me with any questions, there are no silly questions. You also need an Article 9 condition, and you need to state that within your appropriate policy document. There's several Article 9 conditions. It may or may not be linked to the lawful basis, but you have to state which Article 9 condition you're using as well. Yes?
If you don't collect that, do you have to state that you don't collect it?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not like a null kind of entry. No.
If
you don't collect it, you don't collect it. But I would challenge everyone to say that it is very likely that in some way you may collect it. It might even be through images. So don't assume that you don't collect this. Think about all the data types that are coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Right. Quick zoom through consent. Sorry, I'm keeping an eye on time here. And we'll have a few exercises just to see how, how much this has gone in. So basically with consent, as I said, this used to be a catch-all, but if you can't offer a genuine choice, consent is not appropriate and you need to use a different lawful basis. It must be freely given. It should not be part of terms and conditions. We had an interesting discussion earlier, didn't we? Open to interpretation. I would say do not make it part of terms and conditions, but we can discuss this later. It can be withdrawn at any time without detriment, so that's really important. So where previously people were relying on consent, you have to consider, and I'll go back to the employee contract example, if somebody can withdraw consent at any time, that's going to create a bit of a problem for you if it makes up part of the employee contract. It's not that you necessarily, if you have employees, have to replace all your employee contracts. You just can't rely on it for processing personal data. You need to provide a privacy notice. You need to tell employees on which lawful basis you're processing each type of data. And actually, when I'm talking about employees here, it's really important. I ran an employers club a couple of months ago where we were talking about when somebody's employed and when somebody's self-employed, what the difference is. Talking through that. So I would say, when I'm talking about employees, if you have self-employed contractors working for you, it may be that they're accruing workers' rights. That's a different conversation. but err on the side of caution when it comes to data protection. Give them, I would say, similar, at least as good protection as you would give a worker who you'd hired into your organization, because chances are they're accruing workers' rights, and you don't want to find yourself on the wrong side of that situation. Must be granular and specific to each process, and this is the idea of, under the old DPA 98, it wasn't that blanket consent was encouraged, but it was permitted. You can't do that anymore. If you've given consent for something over here, that doesn't mean you've given consent for something over there. A good example would be if you said, put my picture on, yeah, fine, put it on Facebook, but you didn't say Instagram. Actually, you've not given your consent for that. You need to be specific and granular and specific to each process. And keep clear records of all consent. Now, it isn't that somebody has to specifically write to you, but if you, let's say, for example, somebody calls up Claire, makes an inquiry, about possibly coming in and, seeing the hub, and they want to leave their details, and Claire says, great, well, if you're happy for me to, I'll pass your details on to MSLB and she'll give you a call back. I'll take your name and your phone number for that purpose. And then, of course, that person, once they join the hub, they'll have the full courtesy information. But Claire could just jot down, yes, I checked that they were happy for me to have their details. Okay? And yeah, and as I said, existing consent unlikely to be adequate where organizations are in a position of power, such as employers in the employment relationship. There's an imbalance in that relationship. If you hire somebody, of course they're going to sign the contract because they want to work for you. That isn't really free will. Okay? Yeah, and just to reiterate, employees are data subjects too, and that means that all employees must receive privacy notice information when they commence employment, as well as when there's any change to how their information is processed. And just a quick word about data impact assessments as well, because when your technological environment changes, your business environment changes, there's something called a data impact assessment, which you should carry out as well to say, okay, we're bringing in this new, HR database, right? We've carried out a data impact assessment. We've decided the local basis. We've considered the impact on the organization, on the data subjects, etc. So it's important to have that recorded as well. This sounds quite unwieldy. None of this has to be overlong. Yeah.
I appreciate you won't be able to answer now.
No, that's fine. I'll just hang.
It's just that because I'm a social needs parent and I'm as part of the rules for now when we get respite carers, we have to employ them. So do you have any background about carers and hiring them as part of the personal budget? Because am I going to have to do this for my person who looks after my son?
Sorry, you're hiring them. I don't have information to hand about that, but we can have a conversation about that afterwards. I would say that that should be covered by the process through the council.
No, this is why I was asking if you had some background knowledge, because they give us personal budgets, we are given money which we have to use on our what they call personal assistance.
As that's individual and family rather than business. I'm not sure about that, but I'd be interested to know the answer to the question. So when I hand out the evaluation later, if you're happy to, oh, actually we're on LinkedIn together, aren't we? I'll email you on LinkedIn. Yeah, we're on LinkedIn. Yes.
How are you employing them? Is it as a sole trader in effect, or are you using a limited company to employ them?
As an individual.
Right, so as a sole trader, you're on the basis. In which case, I think you should go on the Prosecutor's website, go through as a sole trader, answer the questions, and I think you'll find you don't have to.
Because I have to pay their insurance.
Yes,
so
but that's, as a sole trader, that's not really a company. So there's a different requirement.
Yeah.
So for charities and things like that, membership-only organisations, a lot of this is coming under contract basis, and you don't have to register with the ICO.
Yeah.
So I think you'll get away with it. But
because it's a family situation, and actually what I was saying about at the beginning, that there's a self-assessment tool on the ICO website. It would be really good to have a look at that.
Because if you understand and have this knowledge, you will be able to help a very specific niche group.
Well, I don't specifically have that knowledge at the moment. What I'm saying is I'm happy to look it up and communicate with you, but you can probably find the information that you need on the ICO website. Yeah, because that's quite specific. You're welcome. Yeah. Okay, yeah, and so as well as when there's any change to how their information is processed. So employees, just to reiterate, employees are data subjects too. Treat them as data subjects, okay? And no longer appropriate to use consent within the employee contract, as it's obviously specifically tied to terms and conditions. All right? So, right, a few little exercises. Deep breath. Okay. So you take on a supplier to help you with your marketing. The supplier is a sole trader and based at home.
Should, just to interject,
Mm-hmm.
if we're going to go into this, would it be after the break?
Nope. Nope, I was going to do this,
Alright,
a
fine.
quick summary, and then we'll go into the break
Yeah,
and then
no
questions.
problem.
Yeah,
Brilliant,
that's
yeah,
fine. So so sole trader based at her home, and she sends you an invoice at the end of the month. Now, any thoughts? Is this, sorry, I just went through quick little thought exercise here.
Yeah.
A supplier helps you with your marketing. She's a sole trader based at home, and she sends you an invoice at the end of the month, along with a little chat and email as well. Now, is this personal data or commercial data? What would everybody think here?
I'd treat it as personal.
Yeah. It's both, really, isn't it? Because you've got some commercial data, but if somebody, as you were saying, Stuart, with email addresses, if it's got somebody's full name in it, which mine does actually, if you're looking at it, you have to think to yourself, okay, this is a data subject, this is information about them, this is personal data. You know they're based at home, you've actually got their home address on your invoice, it's personal data, isn't it? Treated as personal data. Over there on the side of caution.
And that's
Yeah.
you're passing your marketing data to them to market for you.
Well, yeah, exactly, and that's a whole other it's a whole other minefield. I do give a 3-hour version of this session, which is a little more relaxed, with a lot more hands-on, workshop activity. But just to get you thinking about it, yeah. And again, I think we covered this already, but an ex-employee contacts you, asks you to provide them with a copy of their file, and for you to delete their HR file from your records. Do you have to comply with their request? Any thoughts?
Consider it.
You have to consider it, and within 30 days and without undue delay, sorry, I should have been the other way around, what you might do is give them a redacted copy of their file. They do have the right to access their data, but as I said before, it might not be everything in there. There might be something which falls under special categories of data for somebody else. If there's been some kind of a disciplinary situation, you have to consider the rights and freedoms of other data subjects as well. Yes.
So the question is going to go far for us. We put people through asbestos awareness training
Yeah.
to cover ourselves if they're aware of it.
Yeah.
So obviously, if I was to delete their file, can I still keep that information so if they came
Yeah.
back to me at a later
What I
date?
was going to say is, I can't think of any situation where you would completely delete somebody's file. You would have to go back and say, for insurance purposes, in our legitimate interests, we're keeping a redacted version of your file. You could tell them what you're keeping. You could certainly tell them what you were keeping, but you would have a valid legitimate interest. You could provide them with a copy of your short legitimate interest assessment to say why. They can always object, but you can say, but our legitimate interests overrides. There's balance here. So you wouldn't delete it altogether. You would have some skeletal information. You might not have an insurance requirement to keep it, depending on the nature of your business.
HMRC, there's all sorts of
Well,
reasons.
HMRC,
Not pretend.
No.
You can't suddenly like somebody from
Yeah.
the system.
the key is, what lawful basis are you processing it under? If it's legal obligations, there will be a specific retention requirement. If it's legitimate interest, there's likely, if you're talking about insurance, to be a specific retention requirement. So this idea that you can just be wiped out from somewhere is inaccurate. There will be things that need to be kept. As I said before, HMRC is 6 years plus current. CIPD recommended HR files are held for 6 years. I mean, there's certain things that you would absolutely, without a doubt, want to keep even in the short term, in case of tribunal claims. But 6 years as a recommendation, that isn't a legal requirement, but it's in your legitimate interest. That's a recognized body in HR recommending that it's 6 years. Yeah. So the answer is you wouldn't delete it. You would get back to them and you'd say, thank you very much for getting in touch. I'm providing you with a redacted copy of your file. Unfortunately, we can't delete it, but we have removed any information which we don't need to keep. There will be things that you don't need to keep. Little, exchanges that have no, no real bearing. Okay? And again, collecting business-to-business data via a form on your website so you can tailor your services. Do you need to provide privacy information on your form?
I think so. That's part of
Yes.
it.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Because there will be elements which are personal data. Okay? And particularly in an organization like this, that Signal, you know, where the majority of people you're dealing with are one-person microentities, because a lot of that information will cross over into personal data. It's not just commercial data.
So when you talk about networking, everybody hands out this card. Is that enough consent to then?
In effect, you are physically giving somebody your business card, aren't you?
Yeah.
And that is commercial data, really. I mean, if you're a sole trader and you've got your address on there, then yes, that's personal data. But if I am giving it to you, it's because I want you to have it.
Yeah.
In effect, I mean, although consent should not be implied, it's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, you could drown yourself in this, and the common sense has to apply, at some point,
It's
obviously.
also legitimate interest. 'Cause if I
Yeah,
put it
legitimate
in,
interest,
there has to be
exactly.
legitimate
It's
for me to
legitimate
contact
interest.
afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. That I'm not going to give you my card if I didn't want to hear from you. So, yeah. But it's a good question. Yeah, and finally, so you hold a very successful event promoting your business, lots of clients attend, everybody's happy. You upload a series of photos to your Facebook page, and a client contacts you to complain that her photo's been uploaded without her consent. Asks for you to remove it. There's several other people in the photo and you really like it. It's perfect. It's got your banner right behind it. Does she have the right to complain, and what do you need to do?
Can you
What do you think?
pixelate her image?
Pardon me?
Can you just take a pixelate her face?
You could.
It looks crap, but I mean, can you
yeah.
say you-
I mean, there's a lot of things. There's a few things to unpick here, because what I'd say is, do you have consent from the other several people in in the picture? I would strongly suggest that you would have that. Now, one of the things that I was talking about earlier, when we were talking about special categories of data, is whether whether most small organizations would be dealing in special categories if you didn't have employees with things such as health data. But if you think about images and the things that can be gleaned from images, you can glean ethnicity, race. There's certain things that can be gleaned from that. So I would personally, before uploading anybody, to anything, I provide my clients with media consent forms. So it's specific consent, and as I talked about earlier, if you said Facebook, don't then stick them on Twitter and Instagram. You need to be specific about these things. So what I would do myself is I'd say, I'm terribly sorry, it's an oversight. I'd probably take the whole photograph down and make sure that I had consent from everybody. But if you did have consent from the other people, yes, you could blur them out, but you'd have to make sure that there was no identifying characteristics. So, or maybe like sort of Photoshop a, filing cabinet in front of her or something.
There's a recent case for LinkedIn because somebody's in a photo and they're supposed to be at work and they're on a network.
Yes,
And
but this happens.
It's who's who, because
Yeah.
is the person in the photo suing the person for the event because they put the photo up, or is it the
Absolutely.
follower? So
It's a big thing. Yeah, my husband was
Photographs are a
yeah.
very interesting aspect though, and there are intellectual property rights over photographs.
Yes,
So I can
absolutely.
stand outside a school on the public highway and I can take photographs of the children in nursery school from the public highway. That is not illegal. But if I go down to Rand's Walk
But it
and I take
depends
a
what you do
photograph
with
of
them.
Rand's Walk, that is illegal because they're, sorry, not illegal, that's in breach of their
Data protection rights. Yeah.
well, they've got a policy which is no photographs.
Yeah.
And because Rand's Walk is not a public piece of real
Yeah.
estate, it's a privately owned piece of real estate, I have to comply with their wishes.
Yeah.
But if I'm on the road, I can take a photograph of anything.
But
And I
if you
own
have
my
a
own.
but if you have a photography business and you're taking those photographs, it depends entirely what you're doing with them.
Correct.
Because if you're uploading them, then quite clearly you need consent. So, right. Okay, so, yeah, so basically we would go back, we'd say terribly sorry, we'd sort it out. Right. I think one quick word about security, then summary, and then we'll break for coffee and then have questions. So just with security, and Robin's your man on security as well, as I understand from our pre-Hub Talk chat. Ensure, basically, follow the principle of privacy by design and default. Make sure that you are thinking it with everything. How do I keep this safe? Ensure good practice. Do not share email addresses or passwords. Don't stick your password on a post-it on your, please don't do that. Run antivirus software regularly. Don't use personal devices for company business. Ideally keep them separate. Keep them separate. If you have to use the same phone or whatever, make sure you've got adequate security. But I would say ideally don't have a separate one. I've got a separate phone for work and a separate phone for home. Yeah, ensured passwords are updated regularly and are alphanumeric, letters and numbers, with special characters for extra security. I know it's a pain in the neck, but there's lots of things that you can do, like there's password keepers that you can get. Just don't put password 123 or QWERTY 123, okay? Hard copies of personal data, we still all use it. Keep it in locked cabinets. Consider your key holder policy, if you've got more than one person accessing that cabinet. Don't forget about things like cleaners coming into the building as well. So have a clean desk policy, and consider safe disposal of hard copies as well. And one of the things that I found with a company I did a data audit for last year was they had fantastic practices and actually already exceeded the requirements of the GDPR, which was amazing. But they had confidential shredding bins in the middle of the office that were unlocked. And they had a cleaning company come in 3 times a week, and you think, there's a flaw in your plan. So, consider safe disposal as well. Cross shredders, all the rest. So, yeah, not too late. This, as I said, will be up, or as Stuart said, this will be up on the Facebook page anyway. So, these are all the things that you should be considering. Who the data protection lead is probably you if you're a one-person business. And, consider all of these things. You may find that, some of you have a policy, you're down here somewhere, but empower your employees and your self-employed contractors to use best practice. Don't just stick a policy in a cupboard somewhere, as I've said. Update consent where consent is a lawful basis. And GDPR compliant contracts in place with all your data processors. Data processors is just a GDPR word for suppliers, in effect. So, yeah. So in summary, do I need it? How will I use it? What lawful basis applies? Where will I store it? Is it secure? How long will I keep it? How will I safely dispose of it? Have I given the data subject privacy information via notice? And am I following my own data protection policy? Fairly key. So, okay, so I think what we're going to do is break for coffees, because I know I've gone over, and then we'll have questions after the break. Okay,
Yeah,
so
quick 10
while on
minutes.
that, yeah, well, I just wanted to just say thank you again for coming. I did actually have evaluation forms, and I meant to hand these out. This is my kryptonite. I always forget to hand out my evaluation forms. If you don't mind just having a quick tick on these, that would be great. But just to say about free resources, the ICO, as I said, they were a bit slow off the mark. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm sending them on the other side. They were a bit slow off the mark in the run up to the 25th of May, and be brutal, because I like to be able to improve my sessions always. So say whatever you like. I'm quite resilient. Yeah. So but the ICO, they've got codes of conduct, they've got checklists, they've got detailed guidance, they've got some really good tools for you to work through. And of course, ACAS. ACAS is a brilliant resource for micro entities. For not just for how GDPR relates to employees, but just for HR in general, for small organizations. They've got something called the ACAS Model Workplace. And if you're a tiny organization, one-person organization, and you haven't yet got to the stage where you're even thinking of hiring somebody, I do run an employers club here, first Tuesday of the month. I think we'll probably restart in September, but I need to speak to Louise about that. But ACAS is brilliant, just for good, solid, basic guidance, and it's a free service. They also have little bite-sized training modules on there, which are quite useful just for running you through something in 15 minutes, just to get you familiar with the principles. Yeah, and if you don't mind filling in the evaluation, do you have any questions? And if there's any that you don't feel you want to raise in this room or you think of afterwards, please do email me. I've got cards up here. And you can Google me, I'm on the web, of course, as well. Okay.
I'll start the ball rolling with a question.
Sure.
So, a membership organisation has done a GDPR, but this is a real world example.
Yeah,
a membership organisation has done a real world assessment of its members and is now GDPR compliant. Due to several pieces of information that has come up during conversations, we're thinking that it's possibly a requirement to take a next of kin, because if the person falls unconscious, a lot of the times you know people, but you don't know who they know. And if their phone is locked, how do you tell somebody that this person has possibly been to hospital? So under GDPR, if we're collecting a third party's
Yeah.
piece of information, would we need to get their consent to hold it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's in your legitimate interest, but I've had this come up with a couple of clients, and what I tend to recommend is that organizations, because usually it's by way of a name and an email, or a name and a telephone number, is just to say on the form when you collect it that, you know, we will check that this, you know, that basically this person is happy to be your next of kin, because you are holding personal data about that person.
Yeah.
And also, when you're collecting next of kin information, I would say, don't ask for things you don't need. You
No,
know,
it's just name and telephone
yeah,
number.
so
that's
if it's
literally
name and
it.
telephone number, and you might want an alternate telephone number in case they're not available there, you know, work and home or mobile, really. I mean, everybody's on their mobiles now. And then perhaps some other means, but I think as it's going to be an emergency situation, telephone obviously is going to be the best. So only collect what you need. And yes, I would either notify that person that they're on your books as a next of kin for such and such a person. Well, sorry, not either. I would do this and tell the person who's provided that name as next of kin that you're doing that.
Yeah.
I am using this information, I'm going to contact them and inform them that they're on the next of kin list. That's what we've done, because we're just, and that's in legitimate interest, that's in your legitimate interest. Because, I mean, there's a whole other host of things you get into, obviously, with children and safeguarding, and, you know, that's a very, you know, involved conversation in itself, you know, where parents would be, you know, giving this information, and that would be specifically on consent forms.
They're specific consent forms.
But where you're talking about adults who are just giving you that information, then yeah, keep the data to the minimum you need, be clear about why you're collecting it, what lawful basis applies, let them know that you're also going to just contact that person to say, just so you're aware you've been listed as next of kin.
So I'm possibly then in a similar situation. So I went with my pet sitting, I asked for a spare key holder or a next of kin authority person. So if they're away, I need to have access, or the police need access, or there's somebody there who knows.
Yeah.
Usually it's a family member for most part.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a neighbour. And I'm usually given an email, a mobile number. You
Yeah.
think I should just text and say, hi, I'm Shumi, I've been given your details
Yeah,
by blah blah,
Yeah.
just to let you know that I'm holding it.
That I'm holding it, yeah, absolutely, and that it's in your legitimate interest to be holding it. I mean, if there was something that fell under contractual, it might be for the fulfillment of a contract, but I would say that is fairly likely to be legitimate interest.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind if I offer a slightly alternative opinion.
Oh yeah,
Because I think
please
that's
do.
very
No,
valid
please
opinion.
do.
And this is where you will
don't worry.
find lots and lots
It's-
of different people in this space
Yeah,
will come
no,
to.
no, that's fine.
And I completely understand why you
Oh.
say that. I think it's actually down to you whether you want to do it, and is your glass half full or half empty. And I would turn around and say, you make that call. Do you need to make that? It is being held in legitimate interest. There is no absolute requirement to go and tell people that you've got some data. It's only if I'm given it, I don't see I have to validate it with that, and that's my view. It's not the view.
The difference there, and I think the difference in our opinion here is probably that because you're not gathering it from that person directly, but basically what we're questioning here is, do they have the right to be
Correct.
informed? So when do they have the right to be informed? And I would argue, just because I like to, as I said, I'm a contingency girl, I like to have all my T's crossed and I's dotted. I would err on the side of caution and say I am holding this
Completely
information.
understand, and I wouldn't argue against
Yeah,
it.
but I can see your argument, because what you're saying is it's actually coming to you via a third party. But in the same way as, say, a recruitment agency might download applications from a job site, you know, a third-party job site, once they start doing something with it themselves, I would argue that they would have to then provide their own privacy information. The person who's uploaded their application to a recruitment site has seen that recruitment site's privacy notice. Obviously, if they're compliant, ideally they would be. But once you start doing something with it yourself, which might be either an extension of the services that you're offering, you know, it's very like your question, or it might be even slightly different from what they might anticipate, then that's a situation where you need to provide privacy information. So I can absolutely see your point, and you know, I appreciate you can see
So I could
mine.
address it is to say, just to let you know, I'm Shumi, so that if you get this number, don't block me. You know, it's just
Absolutely, that's a
you'll
very
know it's an
valid way of doing
emergency.
it. And the other way is, when you ask for that information, is say, just make sure that you tell people that you passed it on.
Yes,
Yeah, you can do that. You can put that on the form. You know, you need to inform people that you. But I would say you can't avoid your own duties as an organisation or as a sole trader, as a business. And so my particular view is to err on the side of caution and tell them. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that
yeah,
answer everybody?
yeah, it kind of does, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Any other questions?
If you're a sole, well, we've just opened a boutique.
Yeah.
And it's collecting, asking customers for their email address for future events.
Yeah.
Do you have a form?
All
'Cause at
you
the
need to
moment,
do
the
is.
the addresses are actually collected on our receipts.
Oh,
Which is
okay.
probably not the best. We
I
asked
would.
them.
If you're getting verbal consent.
Yes.
So sorry, email addresses we're talking rather than home addresses.
Email addresses.
Email addresses. Yeah, I mean, I think a better practice would be to have a form by your till
Yeah.
to say if you'd like to hear about future events, and on that form at the top have some privacy information,
Okay.
just to say we collect this information in our legitimate interest to notify you of upcoming events. If you'd like to be deleted at any time, because in effect that's the right to object.
Yeah.
Somebody to please
So
do contact us on
is
this
there a
number.
standard form somewhere?
There isn't the stand. Well, I mean, there probably is. You could probably find one, but it's easy enough to do. I mean, that's some. Yeah. I mean, email me. I'm more than happy to provide you with a couple of lines of wording to stick on the top of a form. So yeah.
And would it be different on a premises versus a fair versus a market?
It goes back to the lawful basis.
Okay.
You're collecting that information so you can notify them about events. So it doesn't really matter where the event is. Yeah, that's a detail, if that makes sense.
And also it's worthwhile when you send the first email to remind them where they signed up, because
Yes.
if they're at something and they sign up and they hand it to
absolutely,
you,
that's true.
when
Good
it
point.
comes through, it's like, what's this?
Yeah.
If you said you signed up and asked
Yeah,
us
it's
to
a
send you
courtesy
something,
and
it's just a
information,
courtesy,
isn't it?
and then
Yeah.
link to your
Yeah, that's a really good
privacy
idea.
policy and say if at any point you want to.
Yeah,
You can
and
read it.
yeah, that's the other
Okay.
thing is when you do contact them. Yeah, thank you. As I was saying with the just-in-time privacy notice when I was talking about filling in a form
Yes.
and having just a couple of lines of information, as that's online, it would be best practice to link immediately to your full privacy notice, which gives them the full information. And as Stuart's saying, when you email them as a courtesy to say, as you might recall, you gave us your email so that we could contact you about events, and here's a link to our full privacy policy on the website.
And in
Yeah.
fact, a nice
So-
thing, a marketing thing, might be nice to say.
All right, you need to get in touch.
Well, yes. That's,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do.
A nice thing might be to say, I hope the vase, the hat, the rug, whatever is fitting in well. So to kind of remind them of what they bought.
Who you are and what
And
the
who you
service
are.
Yeah,
is.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a marketing thing, but of course there's always opportunities for
Yeah,
marketing.
because we're just.
Sorry, Robin.
But the extension of that is to then ask for a review for your local sales.
Mm.
So hope you like it. Would you mind doing a review here, fine? And this is how you signed up, why you getting it. So you can tie one email into multiple
Okay.
aspects.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, please do get in touch because I can
Yes,
help you
okay.
with that. Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
Can I raise two?
Please.
Two.
Yeah.
One is how would you see GDPR on cold calling for sales? And then the other one is how do you perceive the security of email?
Yeah. How do I perceive security of emails?
Yes.
How do I perceive the security? Well, that would depend entirely on how it's set up. So I'll answer that one first. I mean, as far as security of email, and again, I haven't been an IT contractor since 2001, I would say that my expectation is that email would be behind a login system for the overall computer, and that anything that can be encrypted in terms of attachments and that sort of thing. I mean, you can anonymize things sometimes if there may be data where you don't need the full amount of data. You just need to perhaps know how many people from a certain organization attended a particular event, if you're looking for statistical data to transfer. So it depends on what the information is. You can add extra layers of security with encryption with attachments, certainly. My email knowledge isn't sufficient at this stage to tell you all of the, yeah, that's right, yeah, I'd have to go way back into the memory banks, and my technology is probably pretty out of date, but as far as using the tools available to you, ensure that you're using them well, and as I said, make sure that you've got passwords on your laptop, things should be behind the adequate, more than adequate, the right layers of protection. And then going back, remind me what your first question was? Cold calling. Yeah, so privacy and electronic communication regulations, I don't believe, I'm not 100% sure because that's more marketing than HR. I'm not sure if that covers cold calling. But again, if you're collecting information, obviously if you're cold calling, there's a level of intrusion. Some people will welcome it, some people won't. But where people are willing to give you that information, again, you just have to state over the phone, okay, I'm taking down your details as Claire would with an inquiry. I'm taking down your details so that I can contact you about such and such. We do this in our legitimate interest, or we do this on the basis of consent. Are you happy for me to take your details for this purpose? So it's all about giving the privacy information. So it doesn't change your ability to do that. That would be regulated by, privacy and electronic communication regulations, or possibly an addendum to that. I'm not 100% sure about that. But they still have the right to be informed, and you still need to tell them. Yeah.
You wouldn't surprise you that both of those were to widen the knowledge base.
Sure.
The email bit is, you've also got to consider the recipient. Whereas my email may well be secured to my server, I have no control of what happens to that email when it goes beyond.
Absolutely.
Which is why that protection of the email and why I actually left a health company acting as their DPO, because they were emailing client scans to consultants and they were insisting the email was secure. It wasn't.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
then
it's
on the cold calling,
yeah.
I might take a telephone number, I might find you out, I might go on your website and I might give you a cold call. That's fine. But if you're not there and I write in my diary to call you back in a month's time, I'm now starting to process that data. So that's the bit where, and as soon as someone says, no, I'm not, you've got to recall why. At that point, you turn around and you must make sure you delete it.
And going back to the fundamental principles of the GDPR, it's privacy by design and default. So, ask yourself, is email the best way to send this? Could I do this by Dropbox? Is there another method that would be better? Email tends to be the default position still for so many people, but actually, there's so many tools at our disposal. I wouldn't be sending large attachments to anybody, really. Mostly I would just use Dropbox, and again, that's covered by EU-US Privacy Shield. It might be on the cloud, somebody else might have access, so then I know that it's behind the level of security that it needs to have. And what's more, if I absolutely had to send an attachment that perhaps was, I don't know, like a medical form, I would ensure it was encrypted as well. Yes.
That's given me an idea. Last month I did 15 contracts for the nursery for their staff.
Oh yes, yeah.
And she's a lovely manager, but really terrible at finding things and prints so many things and then leaves them everywhere. So I thought use WeTransfer. It's the first time I've ever used it.
Oh yes, one of my social media friend uses WeTransfer.
And then if you don't open it within 7 days,
it expires. Yeah, it expires. It's a bit like sort of Snapchat-y kind of thing for files. Yeah, it is actually really good. I mean, it's frustrating when you go back to look for something, as I've done, and you go, it's gone, But actually, if something just has an immediate use, and I'm not 100% sure about the EU-US Privacy Shield. I'm sure it does apply, but I'll look into that. But I think, absolutely, if you just need it for something immediate, why not have it expire? Because then it's not sitting on somebody's computer.
And I think nowadays, my son, who's 12, set me up on Instagram last night, and that's the first time I've ever gone onto Instagram. But he said, Mum, you need to know which media you're going to communicate to. And I was like, come on, I just pick up the phone. And he said, no, if it's Facebook, it's more this, it's more that. If it's in Instagram, it's that.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a world that I grew up to computers, but when it hit, Facebook was kind of I had MySpace.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I remember MySpace.
That's what they're learning at school.
Yeah, absolutely.
It comes home and he shows me actually this demographic type of people, Mum, with this.
Well, I don't actually use Facebook. I don't use Facebook. I don't use Facebook for business at all. No, I don't. I'm very specific about that because I use my company Twitter account. I've got my company, my LinkedIn account as well. I don't really have the need for Instagram unless I start throwing tons of events where everybody's looking glamorous and I'm madly going around with my media consent form. But, for certain types of business, obviously, it can be incredibly useful, particularly, if you just opened a shop. I mean, you could create a whole fantastic lifestyle Instagram page. It'd be amazing. But I think it's just deciding on the right medium and just making sure that you've again thought through all the local bases. Yes.
Just on the media consent forms, good enough pictures of big work we've done.
Yeah.
Taking on we now need to get clients to sign up to say.
Did you say that you worked with as clients?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're putting things on your website, get a media consent form for sure. Because it's easy to just assume that people will be fine with that. Not that I'm saying you made that assumption. Yeah, but personally, I would have a media consent form. I would, because it's a record. As you hopefully recall from my presentation, you need to keep records of consent, whether you jot it down or whatever. But I think even better to have somebody to sign it. With photographs in particular, images and video, I would always have written, because it covers you really, really well. So does that answer your question? Yeah. And have a look and say, can these images be refreshed as well? Have an expiry on the consent, because with most of the consent forms that I've provided to clients, I've suggested that they say that they keep an image for a period of 2 years, because images should be refreshed anyway, probably more often than that. But then, of course, that means they have to have a process, an internal process in place. Somebody needs to be monitoring that and make sure those images really do come down, because otherwise you're in breach of. Yeah. Does that make sense?
As an extension to that, I don't take pictures of people's houses, I take pictures of their animals. I do that because that's part of my service provision, so that the pet owner knows what's happening with their animals.
Okay, yeah.
But it's the animal giving you consent.
Well, that's what I was
I was just going to say, when I say living individual,
yeah.
which is I loved my do.
Yes, sentient, but permission, that one that can give permission. But I always make a point that I don't identify the houses. I always do very close cropping. You can't if I do vignettes, so that there's no way. I don't name the animals either, so it's always a very generic kind of, sort of whatever.
Yeah.
So in that sense, and I give the images to the owner first. So if I put any social media images that I'm using for my site, it's not ones that they haven't seen or used. I've maybe enhanced it or whatever.
It's probably likely to fall under commercial information unless you've got pictures of the owner with their dog. So if you're just talking about animals in a non-specific setting without naming the animals, which could possibly be, that's a bit tenuous, but that sounds to me like that's just more commercial. Yeah.
Back to the cold calls. Why do we still get them?
Well, because
I
it's,
tell
if
you,
people are doing it on.
I know my way out. I just give it to my husband.
You just object. Well, I do now. This is a bit mean. But if there's a 5-second pause and you've been queued up, just oops, I'm not wrong now. Yeah. But it goes back to legitimate interests, because marketers are contacting you on one of two bases. It'll be either consent, where the more careful ones have gone around and got consent from everybody, which isn't necessarily what you need to do, but what that organisation will be doing, or any organisation cold calling will be doing, is relying on legitimate interests. So you then have the right to object. You say to them, please take my, and I do this quite a bit. I'm always really polite, because if I do end up talking to somebody, this is just somebody trying to earn a living.
The very fact that they'll call you day after day after day, even if you said, take
well, if they
don't, do they?
They must. I keep having people ring me from Leeds about car crashes, about your recent car crash. Now I know the number, I know the prefix. I just block it, block or divert or.
Yeah, but then they'll pick up another number and they'll.
Oh, probably, yeah. But what they're doing is they're contacting you on the basis of legitimate interest, and then you have the right to object. Now, as I said before, there will be other regulations that apply, and whether it's privacy and electronic communication regulations, I'm going to have to look this up to see where cold calling falls. A lot of marketing falls under those regulations. If you're starting to talk about nuisance callers, that's a whole other area as well. Then there will be. I think it's communications ombudsman.
These clients sound much more like that, because what the subject they're coming up with has never been anything I've ever.
No. Oh, I know. double glazing, you cover, you know, and you think, okay, I appreciate people are trying to make a living, but it is really frustrating when you've had to run downstairs, find a handset.
His classic one is, you rang me yesterday, didn't you? Same answer.
Yeah, well, you can just say, I object to you holding my details, I'd like to be removed from your database immediately.
The direct marketing act comes up on that.
Yeah.
And if you register with the telephone preference service, you've got two things when they call. One is under what basis are you calling me under GDPR, and they have to tell you what the consent or you're doing, what the basis is. And then the other one is if you register with the telephone preference service, you do realise you're breaking the law into the direct marketing act by not checking the TPS calls.
Of course,
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Testimonials. So, I mean, I'm in the process of building a website. I've got a list of testimonials from clients. Obviously, that's
individuals or business.
There, it's all from businesses. But again, where is that in line with GDPR?
Well,
say you're happy for me to share this on my website? Is there a
yeah,
form
I mean, as a matter of courtesy, I would say that anyway. I think as you're, I mean, this is what I did with my testimonials. You know, I'm putting that up in my, well, I suppose it would be on the basis of consent rather than legitimate interest, because I've actually said, would you be happy to provide me with a testimonial to put on my website? I will list your name, job title, and company or charity name. Are you happy with that? And if they come back and say, yes, I'd be delighted, and here's a lovely testimonial, I've got about 4 or 5 on my website now, and it's great because it paints a picture for people. Then in effect you've recorded consent.
You want to provide a privacy notice to say if you do want it removed.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, absolutely. I think I would put that in the original sort of preamble and just say if at any time you decide you want it removed. I mean, they might leave the company. It's good practice again, just for reviewing your content on the website anyway to keep trying to keep them fresh. It's an exercise I need to go through actually because I haven't uploaded any new ones this year. But you know, keep them fresh, keep people informed. But yeah, you know, depending on the basis, if you've just had a I would say always ask for consent, because if you've had an email back from somebody that isn't necessarily, might not have been their intention when they sent it to you. Because I've had a couple of glowing emails and I think, great, but I would never just cut, paste, stick that on the website, because they might say that to you in person. They might not want everybody they work with to know they said that to you. You know, it's a personal thing. So yeah, I would just tell them in the preamble, and if you want this taken down, you know, just let me know.
If they've done it on, say, Google or Facebook, are their names and details on there?
But then that's Facebook privacy.
Okay.
You see, that's when you get into their privacy notice applies, because they have signed up by going through that process of having an account. And
if I were to maybe just use their initials and their location, would that be acceptable?
I mean, you have to go back to your own privacy policy. I think just. I wouldn't have location. I probably would just do initials. Initials are quite, you know, there's a lot of small communities around here, you know, and if people know, if I were you, I'd just put something, or just put the quote. It doesn't have to be linked to anybody at all.
Okay.
You know, if you want to just put like brilliant,
just
fantastic. Yeah, just county, Hampshire. Yeah, Hampshire, exactly, because there'd be a lot of people with, you know, initials RL in Hampshire. Yes.
Sorry, just tapping back into something you said there as well, and Susan saying anyway about discussing. So I think quite a lot of us have got pens and paper on the go as well. So if somebody's phoned me, left me a voicemail with details, they've obviously opted to do that. They're rattling off their telephone number, and I'm not going to remember that, so I've just written it down. I didn't just process their data, and what do I do with it after that?
Yeah, so as I was saying, when you're speaking to somebody, you've taken some of these details down. I mean, ideally, you know, you say, are you happy for me to take these details down? You know, but you're right. I mean, you don't want to make a conversation stilted, unnecessarily sort of bureaucratic, do you? So you need to weave it into the conversation before you hang up. Just say, I've noted down your name, your phone number. Are you happy for me to pass this on to, I don't know, our accounts person or you know, whoever, you know, and they will say yes, because that's why they called.
They will say my notebook, but I'm thinking a notebook, if my notebook was to be stolen.
Well, this goes back to privacy by design and default. Your notebook should be in a locked pedestal, ideally, at night. Clear desk, you know, I've said about clean desk policy. I mean, I've worked in organizations that were really good at this, worked in ones that were really bad at it. And, it's very easy to leave things lying out, but don't. Lock it away at the end of the day. Yeah, keep it on your person.
I'm sure we all can, but if I'm out, I've got my van parked out there, I'm going to do a job, my notebook is left in my van is locked, but my van gets broken into.
Well, I'd say stick it in, if you have an additional way of locking it, I always put anything that I've got in the boot of my car so it's not visible. It's just, I don't tend to carry my laptop around with me unless I need it. I've got a couple layers of security on it anyway, it's just, so with notebooks, I would say, if you need to have it with you, maybe have it with you on your person, in a bag with you or something. If you don't, put it in the glove box out of view, put it in the boot out of view, under the parcel shelf.
So like that.
That's actually causing problems. The number of cars that are being broken into because they have a parcel shelf and therefore you're hiding it, as opposed to no parcel shelf and therefore you can see
Now,
it.
is that scientific?
No,
I won't say we saw it twice the other day.
Oh, right,
Two cars
okay.
parked it was on the South Downs Way.
Right.
But they've been broken
Yeah,
into specifically because...
if you're parked in rural areas, and again, this goes back to privacy by design and default.
It's awareness and
Yeah, it's
understanding what the
awareness, thinking about
situation is and don't put home on as a location on your sat nav.
Yeah.
You will always know. If you live in Petersfield, you will know how to get home from Petersfield. So put Petersfield and go to Petersfield.
Yeah.
Things like that. But on the specific one, if you write it down and you phone them up, and then they say, no, actually, I don't want that. Just rip it out and throw it away.
Okay, well,
And that's not keeping data if you don't need it. That's the other thing.
Because I keep a diary. I'm a pet sitter when I've got, I've got to put addresses down. I keep my diary in my handbag at all times. I don't let it left
Well, the thing is, things will happen.
Yeah.
This is the thing, what the ICO is going to look at is, do you have a process? Do you have a policy? Have you notified people? Are you following your own policy? If you're telling people that you're keeping manual records of things and you're doing it on the basis of whatever, sent by the dog, you've told them, you can't, it's like a flood or a forest fire, or, there is going to be somebody at some point who is going to try to break into, not necessarily your car, but somebody's car, and so that.
So I never leave it in the car. It's always in my handbag.
If you've done a good attempt at what you're supposed to do,
Yeah, absolutely.
and all of that is huge. If you've done a good attempt, then instantly you're going to get 50% knocked off. That's the starting point.
What the ICO is going to want to see is your appropriate policy document if you're handling special categories of data. Do you have processes in place? And with the best will in the world, things will happen. So I'm being told to wrap up now. So if anybody has any other questions, if you wouldn't mind emailing me, I've got cards up here if you don't already have one. And if you wouldn't mind, just thank you very much. Don't start. Thank you, lovely. And thank you again for coming.
Thank you.